Okay, picture this. It is January 2026. We are, 60 years removed from the height of the 1960s counterculture movement?
Roughly, yeah.
And most of the icons from that era, they're strictly history book material now, or, they're legacy acts playing greatest hits tours.
Sure.
But then you open your music feed, and there they are. A brand new release dropping just weeks ago from a band that supposedly ended in a Paris bathtub in 1971.
It's the ghost that refuses to leave the room. And it's not just some reissue or a remaster. It is a new project that feels, well, surprisingly current.
We are talking, of course, about The Doors, and I think for a lot of people, The Doors are just reduced to a poster on a dorm room wall.
Oh, yeah.
You know the one, Jim Morrison, shirtless, the necklace, the stare? It's an image that just screams rebellion.
Right, the Lizard King caricature. But if you only look at the poster, you only listen to the radio hits, you miss the actual mechanics of the tragedy and the brilliance. And that is what I want to get into today. This isn't just a recap of their greatest hits. We need to look at how a band that was only active with its original lineup for 6 years, 1965 and 1971, managed to create a legal, musical, and cultural saga that is still generating headlines right now, this month.
It is a wild timeline. I mean, we are going to go from a chance meeting on a beach in Venice in 65 through the absolute chaos of Miami 69 all the way to this global collaboration released just in January of 2026.
And the central tension we need to track, the thing you should really watch out for as we go through this, is this battle between structure and chaos. You have 3 musicians, Ray Manzarek, Robbie Krieger, John Densmore, who were incredibly disciplined, jazz-trained, structured. And then you have Jim Morrison, who was, well, he was the agent of pure entropy.
The explosion in the middle of the laboratory.
In a sense, yes. And usually explosions destroy the lab. In this case, the container held just long enough to build a legacy that has survived lawsuits, death, and shifting cultures for 6 decades.
So, let's reset the clock. We need to understand who these people were before the fame. It is July 1965. The setting is Venice Beach, California.
Right.
This is the origin story that has been told many times, but I think the specific details tell us a lot about their future dynamic.
It starts with a chance meeting. Jim Morrison and Ray Manzarek were acquaintances from the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television. They weren't best friends, but they knew each other.
Right.
And they bump into each other on the beach. Morrison was arguably homeless at the time, sleeping on rooftops, just sort of drifting.
Yeah.
But he confided in Manzarek that he had been writing songs.
And his description of that writing process is famous. He said he was taking notes at a fantastic rock concert that was going on inside his head.
Which is such a strange way to put it.
It implies he wasn't creating as much as he was just transcribing something he was hearing internally.
It suggests a level of detachment, or maybe channeling. So right there on the beach, Manzarek asks to hear one. Morrison closes his eyes and sings the opening lines of Moonlight Drive. Let's swim to the moon. Let's climb through the tide.
Now, Manzarek was already a musician. He was in a band called Rick and the Ravens with his brothers. He had an ear for this. What did he hear in that a cappella performance?
He heard the structure instantly. He called the lyrics cool and spooky, but more importantly, he heard the musical accompaniment in his head right then and there. He saw the potential for a rock group that didn't sound like the surf rock or the folk rock that was dominating everything. He saw a darker, more intellectual path.
So they decide to form a band, but they needed a rhythm section. Manzarek brings in a drummer he knew from meditation classes, John Densmore.
And this is key. Densmore was in a group called the Psychedelic Rangers, but his background was jazz. He wasn't a heavy-handed rock drummer. He played with a lighter touch, more rhythmic complexity.
So he joined in August 65.
Yep. Then they recruited Robbie Krieger on guitar. And Krieger was bringing in flamenco and folk influences. He played fingerstyle, not with a pick.
So you have a jazz drummer, a classical and blues keyboardist, a flamenco guitarist, and a poet. It's a very odd mix.
It's a mix that shouldn't work for a rock band, but that's exactly why they sounded so distinct. And we have to address the elephant in the room regarding their lineup.
Ah, yes.
If you look at photos of the band on stage, you see drums, guitar, organ, and singer. You do not see a bass player.
That is one of those facts that people often gloss over, but from a sonic perspective, it is huge. A rock band without a bass player is like a car without an engine block. How do they drive the low end?
It fell to Ray Manzarek.
Mm-hmm.
He played a Vox Continental organ with his right hand. That's the swirling, carnival-like melody part everyone knows. But his left hand was on a separate instrument entirely, a Fender Rhodes piano bass.
It sat right on top of his organ.
Exactly. So he is splitting his brain in half.
That's incredible.
Effectively, yes. But here is why that matters for you, the listener. A real bass player uses strings. They pluck. There is a percussive thump, an attack to the note. A keyboard bass is a sustained tone. It hums, it doesn't punch, it rolls. It is smoother and more hypnotic.
It creates a bed of sound rather than a rhythmic spike.
Precisely. And because there was no bass player locking in with the kick drum, John Densmore was free. He didn't have to just keep the beat. He could play jazz fills, he could interact with the vocals. It gave the Doors this weird, floating, fluid sound that was completely different from, say, the Rolling Stones or the Beatles, who were very grounded in the rhythm section.
And it left a massive sonic hole right in the middle of the mix.
Which Jim Morrison filled with that baritone voice. It really was a perfect storm of physics and personnel.
They also needed a name. And again, they didn't choose something random. They chose a literary statement.
The Doors.
Right.
Derived from Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception. That book details Huxley's experiences with mescaline. But Huxley himself was referencing the English poet William Blake.
The quote is, "If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite."
That is a very heavy philosophical concept for a garage band in 1965.
It's not the Beach Boys.
No, it signaled their intent. They weren't just a pop act trying to get on the radio. They were positioning themselves as explorers of the mind. They wanted to break through the mundane reality to the infinite. It set them apart as intellectuals, or at least pseudo-intellectuals, immediately.
So they have the name, the members, and the philosophy. Now they need to cut their teeth. In early 1966, they land a residency at a place called the London Fog.
And we should be clear about what the London Fog was. It was not the Whiskey A Go-Go. It was not glamorous.
Not at all.
It was a dive bar on the Sunset Strip, described often as rundown and sleazy. They were sharing the bill with Rhonda Lane, exotic dancer.
It sounds like a tough room.
It was a room where no one was really listening, which was actually a blessing. Because the venue was low stakes and they had to play for hours, they had the freedom to experiment. This is where the jam band aspect of the Doors really developed.
They could stretch out.
They learned to lengthen their songs, to improvise sections just to kill time.
This is where Light My Fire and the N started to grow from normal-length songs into these massive 10-minute journeys.
Exactly. Manzarek said the band became a collective entity there. They learned nonverbal communication. If Morrison wanted to take the poetry in a weird direction, the band learned how to follow him instantly. That musical telepathy was forged in the London Fog.
They eventually graduated up the street to the prestigious Whiskey A Go-Go in May 1966. This was the big leagues. They were the house band.
Which meant they were opening for major acts. They supported Van Morrison's group, them. There's actually a legendary moment where the two Morrisons, Jim and Van, jammed together on Gloria.
Wow.
It was a passing of the torch in a way.
And it was at the Whiskey that the industry finally noticed them. Jock Holtzman, the president of Elektra Records, and producer Paul A. Rothschild came to see them. They signed to Elektra on August 18, 1966. Everything seemed to be going perfectly.
And then, 3 days later, on August 24th, they got fired.
The firing is such a pivotal moment in their lore because it involves the song The End. Now, The End was always a dramatic piece. But on this specific night, Morrison was in, let's say, an altered state.
Right. And during the instrumental breakdown, he began to improvise a spoken word section based on the Greek myth of Oedipus.
This is the section that most people know now, but at the time it must have been absolutely shocking. The protagonist in the story kills his father and, well, has relations with his mother.
Morrison didn't hold back. He used explicit profanity. He screamed it. It was a harrowing, primal scream therapy session happening on a stage in front of a casual drinking crowd.
The club management was horrified.
Oh, yeah. They were terminated immediately. But, crucially, they had already signed the record deal. The ink was dry.
So they take that energy right into the studio. They record their debut album in August 1966. It is released in the first week of January 1967.
The self-titled album, The Doors. It is widely considered one of the greatest debut albums in rock history. It included The End, recorded live in the studio as a nearly 12-minute musical drama. But commercially, the engine was Light My Fire.
That song was a rocket ship. It became the first single from Elektra Records to hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It sold over 1 million copies. And suddenly, the Doors aren't just an art band from Venice, they are pop stars.
Which brings us to September 17th, 1967, the Ed Sullivan Show.
A cultural collision. You have Ed Sullivan, who represents the old guard, the living room of mainstream America, and you have Jim Morrison, the leather-clad symbol of the new generation. The conflict was, it was inevitable.
The network executives were nervous. They came to the dressing room and asked the band to change a lyric in Light My Fire.
Right. They wanted the line, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher," removed. They felt it was too obvious a reference to drug use.
They suggested changing it to Girl, We Couldn't Get Much Better, and the band agreed. Or they appeared to agree. They told the executives, sure, no problem.
But then the cameras roll. Live television. Millions of people watching.
And Morrison looks right into the camera and sings the original line, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher." He even emphasized it.
The fallout backstage was immediate. Ed Sullivan was furious. He refused to shake their hands.
They had been booked for 6 future shows. The producer told the band, "Mr. Sullivan wanted you for 6 more shows, but you'll never work the Ed Sullivan Show again."
And Morrison's reply was legendary.
He reportedly said, "Hey man, we just did the Sullivan Show."
It was a declaration of victory. They didn't need the establishment. They had hijacked it. This just solidified their reputation as dangerous. They weren't going to compromise.
And late in 1967, they released their second album, Strange Days.
Strange Days is interesting because it shows how quickly they were evolving. They were early adopters of the Moog synthesizer, which was cutting-edge technology at the time.
It was. But it also highlights a detail about their recording process that contrasts with their live shows. We discussed the lack of a bass player. But in the studio, that didn't work as well.
Why not? If it worked live, why not on the record?
Because of the physics of vinyl and mixing. The keyboard bass just lacked the articulation or definition needed for a punchy record. It sounded muddy.
I see.
So for Strange Days and subsequent albums, they brought in hired guns. Session musicians like Larry Knechtel, Douglas Lubon, and later Jerry Sheff.
So the sound on the record is actually a 5-piece band.
Correct. It is a very important distinction. The studio Doors had a bassist. The live Doors did not.
As 1967 drew to a close, the tension around the band, and specifically around Morrison, began to escalate. The chaos part of our theme was really starting to overtake the structure.
Absolutely. On December 9, 1967, they played the New Haven Arena in Connecticut.
And this night ended with Morrison being the first rock artist to be arrested on stage during a live performance.
It started before the show. Morrison was backstage in a shower stall area talking and kissing a female fan. A police officer who was providing security didn't recognize the lead singer.
He thought I was just some trespasser.
Exactly. The officer told him to leave. Morrison, being Morrison, was defiant. He refused. The officer produced a can of mace and warned him, "Last chance."
And Morrison replied, "Last chance to eat it."
So the officer maced him.
Wow.
He was blinded, in pain. The show was delayed while he recovered. But when they finally took the stage, the adrenaline and anger were peaking. During Backdoor Man, the music quieted down, and Morrison started improvising a story.
He told the audience exactly what happened.
He pointed out the little man in blue. He began taunting the police who were lining the stage.
And the police didn't wait for the encore.
No. The house lights came on. The police rushed the stage, grabbed the microphone, and dragged him off. He was charged with inciting a riot, indecency, and public obscenity.
The charges were eventually dropped, but the image of Morrison being dragged away by cops became defining.
It signaled that a Doors concert wasn't just music. It was a potential riot.
Moving into 1968, the band is massive. They release Waiting for the Sun. This album contained their second #1 hit, Hello, I Love You, but even their hits brought controversy.
Yes, Hello, I Love You was incredibly commercially successful, but it drew fire from the British rock scene. There were accusations that the song bore a striking resemblance to All Day and All of the Night by the Kinks.
And if you listen to the main guitar riff, the similarity it's undeniable.
It's very close. The publisher of the Kinks song announced they were planning legal action. Ray Davies of the Kinks ultimately chose not to sue, but he was resentful. He felt they had appropriated his sound. It was ding to their artistic credibility in some circles.
And that credibility took another hit with their next album in 1969, The Soft Parade. This was a major left turn.
It was a radical departure. Their producer, Paul Rothchild, wanted to experiment. He suggested incorporating brass and string arrangements. He wanted a bigger, more orchestral pop sound.
And the band agreed.
The band, particularly Manzarek and Densmore, who loved jazz and classical, agreed.
But the critics and the hardline fans absolutely hated it.
They were accused of selling out. The raw, dangerous, bluesy sound was replaced by horns and strings. It felt Las Vegas to some people.
It was also a time of significant internal conflict.
Huge conflict. Morrison was becoming less involved in the writing. Robbie Krieger wrote a song called Tell All the People, which included the lyric, "Can't you see me growing? Get your guns." Morrison refused to sing it as if he wrote it. He said he didn't want people to think he was telling them to get guns.
So they changed how the credits worked.
Right. Before this, all songs were credited to The Doors, a collective. For the Soft Parade, they listed individual writing credits to distance Morrison from Krieger's lyrics. The unity was fracturing.
And then we arrive at the breaking point, the most consequential night in the band's history, Miami, March 1st, 1969, the Dinner Key Auditorium.
If New Haven was a tremor, Miami was the earthquake. And you have to set the scene to understand why it went so wrong. The venue was a converted seaplane hangar. It was not a concert hall.
It had no air conditioning in Florida.
No air conditioning. It was sweltering. And the promoter, out of greed, had oversold the show.
Massively.
The capacity was about 7,000. He removed the seats and crammed in 12,000 people. It was a solid wall of sweating humanity. And Morrison, he was not in a good place.
He had missed his connecting flights.
He spent the day drinking in airport lounges. By the time he arrived, the show was over an hour late. He was heavily intoxicated and antagonistic.
He had also recently been influenced by a theater group called the Living Theater.
Yes, the Living Theater used antagonistic performance art. They would scream at the audience, try to provoke a riot to wake people up from their apathy. Morrison decided, in his intoxicated state, to try that approach at a rock concert.
So the show starts, and it's a disaster. He's stopping songs. He's not singing.
He's berating the crowd. He called them a bunch of slaves. He shouted, "What are you going to do about it?" over and over. He wasn't acting like a rock star. He was acting like a villain.
Someone poured champagne on him. He took his shirt off. He was soaking wet.
And then the allegations arose that he exposed himself.
That is the central controversy that has been debated for 50 years. Did he or didn't he?
The band members, specifically Manzarek, always denied it. Manzarek called it a mass religious hallucination, that the crowd thought they saw it because Morrison was acting so wild. But the local authorities didn't see it as a hallucination.
4 days later, a warrant was issued.
Indecent exposure, profanity, drunkenness. It was a felony charge. He was convicted and sentenced to 6 months hard labor. He remained free, pending an appeal, but the damage was done.
It killed their career live, didn't it?
It was an immediate blacklist. Promoters across the country canceled their shows. Radio stations start playing their records. They went from being the biggest band in America to being toxic untouchables. The chaos had finally destroyed the machine.
It is worth noting, as a footnote, that decades later in 2010, Florida Governor Charlie Crist issued a posthumous pardon.
A resolution long after it mattered. But at the time, this forced the band to retreat. They couldn't tour, so they went back to the studio.
That retreat produced Morrison Hotel in 1970.
Which was ironically viewed as a massive return to form. They stripped away the horns and strings of the Soft Parade. They went back to basics, roadhouse blues, hard rock.
And the critics loved it.
Critics who had written them off suddenly loved them again. Cream magazine called it horrifying rock and roll in the best possible way.
But while the music was recovering, the man was not. Morrison's instability was growing. On December 12, 1970, they played the Warehouse in New Orleans. This would turn out to be the last time the four of them shared a stage.
It was a sad ending to the live act. Midway through the set, Morrison seemed to lose all energy. He slammed the microphone stand into the stage floor repeatedly until he destroyed the platform beneath it. He then just sat down and refused to perform.
It wasn't a riot like Miami, it was a collapse.
It was a collapse. And after that night, Densmore, Manzarek, and Krieger made a decision.
They decided to end the live act. They realized he simply couldn't perform anymore. They would focus entirely on recording.
This decision leads us to L.A. Woman, released in 1971. The production of this album saw a major change. Paul Rothchild, who had produced every album prior, walked away.
He listened to the new material and famously called the song Love Her Madly cocktail lounge music.
He thought they were finished. So the band produced it themselves with engineer Bruce Botnick. They recorded it in their rehearsal space, not a fancy studio. They even recorded the vocals in the bathroom doorway because the tile had good acoustics.
It gave the album a very raw, live feel.
It did. And it gave us Riders on the Storm, a song that is just hauntingly atmospheric. It would eventually be inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. It features Jerry Scheff prominently on bass, giving it that driving pulse.
It was a creative peak, ironically achieved just as the band was falling apart.
Exactly. In March 1971, with the album recorded but not yet released, Morrison took a leave of absence. He moved to Paris with his partner, Pamela Corson.
He wanted to escape the rock star image. He wanted to focus on writing poetry. He had visited Paris before and felt inspired there.
But on July 3, 1971, the story takes its tragic turn. He was found dead in a bathtub in their apartment.
The circumstances have always been shrouded in mystery because no official autopsy was performed.
French law at the time didn't require one if no foul play was suspected. The cause of death was listed as heart failure. He was buried in the Poets' Corner of Père-Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, alongside Oscar Wilde and Chopin. He was 27 years old.
Joining the infamous 27 Club.
It cemented his myth. He didn't grow old. He didn't fade away. He stopped at the peak of his chaos.
Now, many people assume the story ends there, but the entity of the Doors continued.
They did. L.A. Woman was climbing the charts when he died. The three surviving members, Manzarek, Krieger, and Densmore, didn't want to stop playing. They recorded 2 more albums as a trio, Other Voices in 1971 and Full Circle in 1972.
With Manzarek and Krieger sharing vocals.
Right. They even briefly considered hiring Iggy Pop as a replacement, which would have been fascinating.
But without Morrison, the magic and the commercial success faded. They disbanded in 1973. However, in 1978, they managed to bring Morrison back for one more album.
An American Prayer. This is a unique project. Morrison had recorded hours of spoken word poetry in 1969 and 1970. The surviving members took those tapes and composed new music around them. It wasn't just backing tracks. They treated his voice as the lead instrument.
And it was successful.
It was certified platinum. It proved that the public's fascination was still very much alive.
That fascination surged again in 1979 when Francis Ford Coppola used the end in the opening sequence of Apocalypse Now.
That was a massive cultural moment. It recontextualized the band. It linked their music permanently to the darkness, the psychological trauma, and the jungle warfare of the Vietnam era. It made the Doors feel dangerous again to a new generation.
Then came the 1991 Oliver Stone film, simply titled The Doors.
A very polarizing film. Val Kilmer starred as Morrison, and his performance was uncanny. But the surviving members had mixed reactions. Ray Manzarek was particularly critical.
Why was that?
He felt the movie focused entirely on the drunk lunatic side of Morrison and ignored the poet, the intellectual, and the humor. John Densmore stated that a third of it was pure fiction. But it introduced the band to millions of teenagers in the 90s.
As we move into the 21st century, the story shifts from the stage to the courtroom. This is where the order of the band started to fight amongst itself.
Right. In 2002, Manzarek and Krieger started touring again.
They called themselves the Doors of the 21st Century. They had Ian Astbury from The Cult on vocals, but John Densmore was not involved, and he was not happy. He, along with the Morrison estate, sued them.
Densmore has always been very protective of the legacy. He famously vetoed a $15 million offer to use Break On Through in a Cadillac commercial.
He argued that Morrison would have hated his song being used to sell cars.
And the lawsuit over the name was bitter. Densmore argued that the Doors was the 4 of them, and without Jim and himself, they couldn't use the name. The court agreed. Manzarek and Krieger had to change the name to Manzarek Krieger.
Despite the legal battles, the musicianship continued to find new avenues. In 2012, they collaborated with the electronic artist Skrillex on a track called Breakin' a Sweat.
It was a fascinating collision of generations. Ray Manzarek, the jazz keyboardist, was in the studio with the king of dubstep.
What did you think of it?
Manzarek was actually very complimentary. He compared the complex beat Skrillex played to something Miles Davis would appreciate. He said it was hot as hell.
Sadly, that was the twilight of the original lineup's ability to reunite. Ray Manzarek passed away on May 20, 2013 in Germany from bile duct cancer.
It was a huge loss.
Yeah.
He was the architect of their sound. But his death did bring a form of peace. In 2016, Densmore and Krieger reunited for the first time in 15 years to perform a tribute to Manzarek at a Stand Up to Cancer benefit.
It seemed to mark a healing of those old legal wounds.
I think so. Which brings us to the present day. We are in January 2026. Last year, 2025, marked the 60th anniversary of the band's formation.
And they didn't let it pass quietly. Just weeks ago, on January 9, 2026, a new release dropped that brings this entire journey full circle.
This is a project for the Playing for Change Foundation. It features the surviving members, John Densmore and Robbie Krieger.
They reunited as the Doors for a Song Around the World version of Riders on the Storm.
Yes. Now,
Yeah.
we should explain this concept for the listener. This isn't just a remaster.
No, not at all.
Song Around the World means they take the core track and add musicians from different countries and cultures to it. But what makes this specific release so powerful is the technology involved. They incorporated archival recordings of Jim Morrison's vocals and Ray Manzarek's keyboards.
So in a digital sense, the original four are performing together again in 2026.
Yes, you have John and Robbie playing live now, interacting with the ghosts of Jim and Ray, plus a host of international artists adding their own textures. It creates a bridge across time. It transforms Riders on the Storm from a song about a killer on the road into a global anthem about connectivity.
It is remarkable to think about that journey. We started on a beach in Venice in 1965, creating a sound that had no bass player. We went through the sleazy dive bars, the censorship of national television, the riots, the arrests, and the tragedy of Paris. And now, in 2026, the music is still active, still evolving.
It proves that the music has transcended its time. They have sold over 100 million records worldwide. They're one of the best-selling bands of all time. But more than the sales, it's the relevance.
It brings us back to that duality we started with. Order and chaos. The band provided the order, the structure, the jazz chops. Morrison provided the chaos, the poetry, the danger.
And looking at this 2026 release, it raises a provocative thought for you, the listener. The Doors were so rooted in a specific time and place. Los Angeles, the late 60s, the Vietnam era. They were the soundtrack to a very specific American anxiety. But with projects like this, Global Riders on the Storm, we are seeing the recontextualization of their art. Does stripping it of its specific geography and era dilute it? Or does it prove that the doors of perception Morrison and Huxley talked about are truly universal and that the infinite they were looking for is actually found in this kind of global connection?
It is certainly something to mull over next time you hear that keyboard intro.
Okay.
Thanks for listening.